Well, first of all, I being a person of faith, I believe God gives us the gift of life. Um, and He didn't just leave us with this gift without adding other gifts to it, which is um, providing two sources of knowledge to allow us to live well. And those two sources of knowledge are one is religion and one is science. And we think about how these two interrelate and interact with each other. One can say that religion are the instructions and science is the tool.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Reflections on Living Well podcast, where we explore perspectives on the good life in the 21st century. I am your host, Broderick Rodell. I hope you enjoy this conversation. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Reflections on Living Well podcast. Today, our guest is Bob Henderson. Bob is a native of San Jose, California. He retired from law enforcement after 26 years of service and is a member of the National Association of African American Police Officers. Bob offers a radically unique perspective on reimagining our entire criminal justice system that is both practical and holistic. Bob is a member of the Baha'i Faith, which has as a core belief the oneness and wholeness of the entire human race. That is, we are all connected. And what positively or negatively impacts one member of the human race will ultimately affect us all. Hi, Bob. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me here.
Yeah, I'm very excited to have you here to have this conversation. With your background and law enforcement, I think you may have a unique perspective. I think that we can all learn from. I'm always saying um, that it's important to glean something from the life of somebody else and their life experiences, and that's why I like to have these conversations at least right now with folks a little older who've had a little bit of life experience, and who have different backgrounds as well. And yeah, just very excited to see what you have to say here. I know I
Yeah.
just gave that introduction, but I like for folks to introduce themselves as well. So have at it.
Okay, great. Well, first of all, Roderick, thanks for having me here. Maybe I can just add a few more introductory words about myself. I'm married. I have six kids. They're all adult age, and I grew up in Arroyo Grande, which is south, 200 miles south of San Luis Obispo. Actually, about 50 miles south of San Luis Obispo, rather. A lot of people know about that. They don't know about Arroyo Grande. It's a predominantly Caucasian or white neighborhood. We're the first African American family to actually live there. Um, and I grew up in an interracial family. Um, so all these things sort of factored into or created who I am today in terms of my environment where I grew up. And as Roderick mentioned, that I spent 26 years in law enforcement, and being a Baha'i, it gave me a unique perspective on how I live my life. I'm just happy to be here to be able to share my perspectives on things um, and contribute to the positivity that we're all trying to generate here in this podcast.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, that's definitely what we're trying to do here. Is give some attention to the positivity, because we humans have that negativity bias, and we can excessively focus on the negativity aspects of life. Yeah, of course, we have that bias for a reason, and it serves a purpose to attend to things that are not so savory in the world, and so we can learn from them, so we can learn how to change ourselves and in order to change the world for something better. So we do need to give some attention to it, but I think sometimes we forget to actually imagine what kind of world we want, and have the kind of conversations that's going to help us gain some clarity around the type of world we want to see. So speaking of that, I'm sure we'll dig a little bit more into your history here. Um, what is your perspective on what it means to live well, a good life? And then we'll just unpack that for the rest of the conversation.
Okay, yeah, great question. Um, well, first of all, I being a person of faith, I believe God gives us the gift of life. Um, and He didn't just leave us with this gift without adding other gifts to it, which is um, providing two sources of knowledge to allow us to live well. And those two sources of knowledge are one is religion and one is science. And we think about how these two interrelate and interact with each other. One can say that religion are the instructions and science is the tool. And the reason why I mention that is because we live in a world where we're not in balance. I would say that I've heard other people say this, that we're like, scientific giants and moral midgets, that we're not in balance. And so between these two sources of knowledge, when properly applied, allows us to live in harmony and in balance within ourselves and our interaction with the world around us, with other people, and being in harmony with the natural world that we live in. And so when we break this down and sort of look at like what does it mean to be in harmony and balance with oneself using the tools and the science of really religion and science, we can think of it like this: we as human beings we're multifaceted. By that I mean every aspect of us has requirements. Like for example, our body, you know, um, has certain needs that we need to have access to clean air, clean water. We need to think in terms of our diet, proper exercise, proper rest. So our physical health is very, very important. And we think in terms of our emotional health. They call it our emotional literacy. This idea that the ability to identify, to um, understand, and to respond effectively to our own emotions and also the emotions of other people in a healthy way, right? In a healthy way. And that's emotional literacy. And then we think in terms of our intellectual abilities. God has given us, each and every one that's born, various capacities. One is our intellectual capacities, and being able to have access to the proper education to be able to hone those natural latent skills that we all have. And then we have a spiritual capacity. Therein lies all of our those heartfelt experiences that we that allow us to interconnect with the world around us. Are all of our virtues and capacities of character lie within the human soul, and those need to be nurtured. And there's various things that I would do as an individual to nurture those capacities. In my case, through prayer, meditation, um, and and through study of the sacred writings, and being able to try to translate those things that I'm reading into reality and action. So that's one thing, and I think that of the guiding factor behind all of this is what Baha'is use this term, the twofold moral purpose. And what that means is um, we have a twofold purpose. One being we have a responsibility to nurture and take care of all those four components that I mentioned, right? The body, the emotions, the intellectual abilities, and our soul and our spirit, while at the same time contributing to the transformation and development of society. So we don't live in an island. So I can say, let me just sort of take care of myself and do everything for myself at a self-centered perspective. That may do me well, but but it's not going to do society very much good. So Baha'is aren't instructed to live a holy life by hiding in the hills somewhere. Come down and interact with the world around you and try to make it a better place.
Wow, that's just beautiful. I loved all of that. And I'm looking forward to unpacking more of that. I love those four different components. Is very comprehensive, integrated approach to this idea of living well, taking into consideration the physical, the emotional, the intellectual, the cognitive, as well as the spiritual, and sharing some tips already. Some of the things that you do and in order to do that. And I love how your faith is such an important piece of the equation that guides you through all of that. And you just touched on all these different pieces already. The individual, yes, take care of ourselves, but also we have a responsibility for others. Have a responsibility for translating whatever we're doing for ourselves into the world, and hopefully that we're contributing to the lives of others in some capacity.
Yes.
That's just beautiful. So I like to always ask this: where did this come from? How did you start to see the world this way, or maybe how did you get into the Baha'i Faith? That seems to be such a central piece to this. I'm just curious about where these ideas come from.
So I was raised in a Baha'i family. My parents were Baha'is, but there's a fundamental Baha'i principle that talks about having an independent investigation of truth. In other words, I can't claim credit for what my parents did spiritually,
Mm.
or I have to own this for myself. So at about 17 years old, I began to study the Baha'i writings for myself to figure out if this is something I want to sort of use as a way to navigate through the world and use as a source to better myself and the world around me. And what I found was everything was there for me. Um, and it allowed me to live, I would say, a coherent life. So all the things that I mentioned earlier, that's about coherence, balancing all of those things. And I really felt like the Baha'i faith allowed me to do those things in a balanced, holistic way. But also, it gave me a greater purpose beyond what I think a lot of people think about. Like, for example, the founder of the Baha'i Faith, his name is Baha'u'llah, said, "Let your vision be world embracing rather than confined to yourself." Said the earth is one country and mankind are its citizens. Now, the reason why I say that because and share that quote with you is because one of the greatest needs I think we have today is trying to identify in a global scale having a global ethic or unifying vision of the nature of man and society. A vision that will enable each and every one of us to advance human civilization as well as to partake of its benefits. And I think so the Baha'i Faith gave me this world vision. And then when I think about like, okay, where are we today as a world community? And I think about the advancements in technology and science, particularly during the 20th century, where in communication and transportation really has fused the entire planet into one neighborhood.
Mm-hmm.
So we are really one world community. And also think about other aspects of science that have shown that we are one family, one people. I think about the Human Genome Project, which was where between 1990 and 2003, a team of international researchers began to figure out what they wanted to know about the human genome, what made up the human genome, what makes a person a human being, right? So they sequenced the entire human genome, and after 13 years, and they had to figure out the technology to be able to do this. By the way, I mean the number of cells in our body and the number of genes in our body, they had to figure this thing out. But after they concluded, they determined that human beings are genetically the same to the degree of 99.9%. So
Mm-hmm.
science has already shown that we are the same. Um, Now, what hasn't caught up with us is this spiritual component to that, which is realization that we are one family. And so, as a result of that, we still have all these forms of various prejudices that we see in the world today. So, maybe I should stop there and let you kind of ask your next question because I can kind of go on and on about how we need to eliminate various forms of prejudice so that we can have this world community that I spoke of.
Oh no, this is great. I'm always game. Like just keep going. And I think
Okay.
I love that though. I actually love the pause because you touched on again so many things in such a short period of time there. I particularly like that quote a lot, and um, I think it's important for all of us, me to hear it, and I think the audience. This is my opinion, of course, that in your particular faith, there is this. It's a very modern take on spiritual practice, religion, that is this centering of spiritual development, yes, in yourself, but also translating that into the development of society. And it's just this responsibility to others, this encouragement to remind ourselves that we are connected with all other beings and we have a responsibility to each other, and how that is seems to be so central to this faith, and at least how you have been uh, inspired by it. I just think that's wonderful, and I think that sometimes we can, particularly in our country here in the United States, we have this great uh, um, idea constitution that supports individuality and individual freedom and liberties and things of that nature, that's great. And historically, we can understand why that is such an important thing. Not many people throughout human history has had the uh, capacity to do the things that we're uh, at least supposedly protected uh, to be able to do in our society. Nonetheless, sometimes we can forget the others part. We can forget that we are a community. We forget that we're a global community now.
Yes.
And I think that that reminder, even here in the beginning, you're reminding us that no, we are a family, we are a community, and my faith even suggests this. And I think that this is important. So I just think that's great, actually. um, so I would like to hear a little bit more. I'd like you to continue in your narration
Yeah.
here about
Okay.
uh,
Sure.
society and community and how we can be more responsible
Yeah.
towards each
Well,
other.
yeah, absolutely. So, one of the things that I believe through my faith and through just lived experiences and just observing and trying to understand history. And by the way, I love the words of James Baldwin, who said that people are lost in a history they don't understand.
Mm-hmm.
Because oftentimes we don't take the time to understand history, and therefore it's difficult to understand where we are today in the present moment. Where are we, in time and space? Like we're, and you're not in the lack of being oriented as to that. And so, I spent some time understanding history through the lens of looking at things through this concept, a fundamental concept of the Baha'i Faith called the oneness of humanity. This idea that we're all one family. So I'm looking at history through this lens and when and doing that, um, uh, I can see where we where we've gone wrong, where the things we've done well, and and it gives me a sense of where we are today. And so one of the things that I think about is if in fact we live in an ever progressive society, what can I do today, and what can others do to make the world a better place in a practical way, in a pragmatic way? How can we actually go about doing that? In one of the profound quotations from Baha'u'llah, the founder of Baha'i Faith, that sort of gives me a framework for sort of living my life, is when he said that, and I'll quote this: "The well-being of mankind, its peace and security, are unattainable unless and until its unity is firmly established." I'll say that again, then I'll give some points about that. So the well-being of mankind, its peace and security are unattainable unless and until its unity is firmly established. Now, in quote. But when you start to think about that, if you were to ask people, do you want peace? Do you believe in peace? Everyone on the planet, I think, would say, of course I want peace. Even those radicals that think differently, they would say, yeah, I want some semblance of peace in my life. Everybody wants peace. But peace has a prerequisite to it. And that prerequisite requires us to apply universal unifying principles. And I'll just I named one already, which is the oneness of humanity, but also having this well, at least from a Baha'i perspective, this is how we understand religion. And I'm only saying this in the context of how are we going to rid ourselves of various forms of prejudice? Because if we think in terms of ourselves as one people, as one planet, and where it's sort of the goal is to unify. Um, Anything that interferes with that in various forms of prejudice would be viewed from a Baha'i perspective as a disease, as a social disease. So various
Mm-hmm.
forms of prejudice are social diseases. So how do you rid yourself of a social disease, right? So we went through COVID-19, you get a shot, you do this preventive, wear a mask, you try to do all you can to safeguard yourself. But how do we safeguard ourselves, and how do we rid ourselves of prejudice? And so there's very practical ways in which the Baha'i faith attempts to, and actually, in fact, has eliminated or is in the process of eliminating these forms of prejudice. One being religious prejudice. So, from Baha'i perspective, um, religion is part of one process, and I say that because in order to rid of yourself of a prejudice, let's say religious prejudice, it's not about me tolerating you. Okay, So you belong to this faith and you belong to that faith, and therefore like tolerance is not an elimination of prejudice. It's a way in which it's almost like for me, it's like an arrogant way of saying, it's okay. You're a bit lost, and I will tolerate you. Well, I'm not thinking in terms of this idea of religion being one process, and so there's one God, and this is how it's explained that God has given his message to humanity through very special individuals whom we've known throughout history as some call avatars, some say messengers, some Baha'is use the term manifestations of God as they manifest the will and purpose of God. And so these individuals have been known with such names as Abraham, Zoroaster, Krishna, Buddha, Moses, Jesus the Christ, Muhammad, and in more recent times, the founder of the Baha'i Faith. Let me get rid of this thing off of my screen. Of Baha'u'llah. And all of them have contributed to the advancement of humanity. And when you look at it collectively, you see humanity has evolved from families to tribes to cities to states to nations. And Baha'u'llah said in his coming, he appeared in the 19th century, mid 19th century, and he said that I'm paraphrasing, but nation building has come to an end. I've come to help unify the entire planet with these universal principles. Um, and so one being, of course, religion. And so Baha'is view religion as part of one process, and all of these agents of God, if you will, messengers of God, manifestations of God, avatars, have contributed to the advancement of society. But they've done it in a way that, for a lot of people who are viewing history can be very confusing for folks, because they bring two messages. One message that they bring is eternal principles, like they all taught the Golden Rule, for example. But they also were bringing a message that's specific to the age in which they appeared.
Mm-hmm.
Which like, for example, Moses talked about, he had mentioned don't eat pork, because if you ate pork, you would get, there's a bacteria in there called trichinosis. You'd get, trichinosis, and you would die. So that's one of the socials. But today, you could eat pork and you're not gonna pass away, right? So because we know how to process it, we know how to refrigerate meat properly today. So that's just an example, a small example of like a social law. But the spiritual laws and the spiritual themes are all the same. So way Baha'is view religion is it's one process. So therefore, let me get a more of a specific example. When my wife and I met, she came from a Catholic background. And so one of our first dates was having this heavy conversation on religion. And I said, oh, I love Christ. And I explained what I knew about Christ. But she could have been a Buddhist. And I love Buddha. She could have been a Jew. I love Moses. Like, I had them all covered. All the bases were covered, because I view religion as part of one holistic process. So that's one thing. I mentioned the oneness of humanity, the oneness of religion, but also the equality of women and men are very key and essential to building a world community. And the way Baha'is understand this equality is like, and this is an analogy given in the Baha'i Faith, which is this idea of women and men are like wings of a single bird. And if a bird is going to fly properly, it needs to have one wing, both wings equally as strong. So it's the principle of complementarity, right? This idea that one complements the other, and so this whole idea of like thinking women are inferior it's always been a fallacy. And Paula said, women and men have always been equal in the sight of God. It's not like they just became equal. They've always been equal. Men were just unaware of it. So now we've become more and more aware of it on a global scale. And that's breaking down many barriers, and many cultures are just, are entrenched with these false beliefs, and it's slowly breaking down with this new concept of the equality of women and men. I mean, it's relatively new when you think about how it's been implemented, even in this country. With 1990, women got the right to vote in this country. I mean, like, things are fairly new with this concept. Women and men are in fact equal, and so we're learning how to implement that principle on a global scale. There are many principles, but the one I want to share is Baha'u'llah talked about everything needs, because we live in this new age, needs to be revolutionized. And one is our false concepts of power and justice. And let me just share briefly, and I'll stop for the next question. But power is oftentimes viewed as today, and historically, it's always been this way, of those in power are able to use their power as a means to subjugate others. right? It's to gain an advantage against someone else, right? Like it's almost like this idea of a hierarchy. There's people on top, people on the bottom. Baha'u'llah said, and that's really based on a competitive mindset, right? So we're talking about one's consciousness, one's awareness, and you begin to think in terms of competition, and everything you do is, even our economics are based on this power structure and power struggle, and so one way to think about power is to think of it in terms of in a cooperative way. So power, Baha'u'llah said, so powerful is the light of unity, it can unify the whole world. So now he's trying to shift our thinking to think in terms of power as based on the powers in a committee. The power is in working with other people. The power is in your ability to cooperate with other people. What about the power of truthfulness today? Right? We've lost this whole notion of like we think it's okay to because if you adopt a mindset of competition,
Mm-hmm.
the goal of competition is to win at all costs. So that's your mindset. Anything goes. Lying, cheating, stealing, murdering. I mean, because your idea is to win. But if your idea is to cooperate and realize we're all interconnected, then that changes how you view the whole notion of power, right? And so the power of truthfulness is so, and the power of unity are so important. What about the power of a good character, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's essential. Like the worst thing that happened to a human being is to have a poor character, right? That is in itself a torment. People say, "Well, I'm so concerned about dying and going to hell." Well, if you have a poor character, you're already in hell. That's just my opinion. Like I mean, not that you can't get out of it, but by making different choices. But certainly, having a poor character is not a good thing. And your power lies in that, in having a good character. And the other one is the power of love. I don't mean it in the superficial romantic sense. I meant the power of love, being that I believe, and this is a kind of a by thought, is that everything has been a world has been created by God based on this magnetic power called love, right? That we believe even the atoms of the universe are all created through this magnetic force, and even at the lowest level between two atoms, you see it's called cohesion. This power that you can kind of see it. But the point is, when love is present, it draws things together. When love is
Mm-hmm.
absent, it pulls things apart, right? And so what we need today is realize that how do we come together and have true unifying bonds of connectedness? And that I really believe starts with approaching life and living life from the heart. So I said all that, but what I'm really trying to say is we need to learn to live life from the heart, because what's one of the things needed today is compassion and an understanding that we're all human beings on this very small planet, and I need to see your humanity, and you need to see my humanity. I always tell people, and this is something that I always reflected upon. The incident with George Floyd on May 25th of 2020, when everyone saw this infamous 9 minutes 29 seconds of horror where Derek Chauvin, the officer, had his knee on the neck of George Floyd. But one of the things, as I'm from through my lens, I'm looking at that in a certain way. I'm thinking, I understand what's going on because he cannot see his humanity. There's a disconnect, and that has various factors that play into it. But I've always asked the question: what if Derek Chauvin, the officer, had a relationship with George Floyd? In other words, they went to school together, or they had some level of friendship, or they knew each other, knew each other's families. Maybe they associated as children. Would that have happened? Right? And my guess is it wouldn't have happened. And so what we need today is, there's that song. What we need today is love, or whatever the song is. But I'm not saying as a cliche, but that's a reality, because love allows us to see each other as human beings, and that's what's most needed today.
Wonderful. Yes. Oh, I'm 100% with you on everything you just said. I think that I think you said something right in the beginning of this. You mentioned um, that you stressed this, and I think this is really important, that the lens that you're using, that you are seeing the world through, and you just said it again when you looked at the George Floyd situation. The lens that we see the world through informs how we show up in the world. I think a lot of what you just mentioned, and you shared what that lens is like for you. by explaining through your faith how you see the world. And how you see the world is going to inform how you interpret the world. Not just in how you interpret the world, but it's going to also inform your consequent actions. Because how you filter events, how we filter events, are going to shape the choices that we make and the actions that we take as a result of those choices. And I think sometimes we forget that, how important that lens is. And that's to be honest, at the core of why I'm doing this podcast is to explore different lenses to help expand our capacity to see the world in different ways. Because maybe we can interpret our experience in a different way. But not only, because as you were explaining this in our interpretation, but it's our programming. It's how we actually uh, construct the world as well. We're making the world. We're not just
Hmm.
interpreting it. We're making the world as we're going along. And we have to be mindful, or it will behoove us to be mindful of the filter that we're using, the narrative, the structure of our mind, our programming. We have to some extent, get to know it, or and also download it, transform it in some capacity, because it is informing our choices. And a lot of times we are not aware of it. The thing about I love about any kind of faith practice, any kind of worldview practice, cultivation, is that it's a practice. It's something that you do regularly to constantly remind yourself of this is how I am desiring to impact the world. And I want to interpret through this lens, but I also want to have an impact on the world based on the structure of my mind, the narrative that I am living by. I think all of that is so important. And I think you articulated your perspective and how you're able to bring in all of these different things through that lens. I think that is so critical. You're able to come back to compassion, to love, to character, power, how you see power, how you interpret power. It's still rooted in this concept of unity, this concept that we are a family, we're connected. And so you're going to see things that a lot of us are not going to see, a lot of people are not going to see based on the grand narrative that you have, your programming or the structure of your mind. You're going to interpret things in a different way, and you're going to look for different types of solutions than say, for instance, in the case of individualism, or or I guess what's the word, over the top, overwhelming individualism versus community and connection.
Yeah.
And if you have an overwhelming individual perspective, of course it's a dog eat dog world. It's a win. It's um, a zero sum game. There's winners and there's losers, and I'm gonna win. That's just the world I live in. Versus what you're saying is like, well, hold on for a minute. How do we see the world through this positive sum lens? That there's a win win opportunity when we recognize our interconnectedness, that we are a family, that we are at our essence, at our core, just one. I think
Hmm.
all of those are so important. I just wanted to just shine a light on that, at least
Yeah.
my interpretation of that, based on what you just said, and how important it is. What what uh, what you just articulated in what you just said just now. Does that make sense? I'm just
It
like babbling.
absolutely, absolutely, it absolutely does. And if I could just kind of just add to the what we're sharing here is, and it kind of dovetail what you were saying earlier, in reflecting on what I said, which is I believe that we don't see the world as it is. We see the world as we are.
Mm-hmm.
By
Yeah.
that I mean we see the world from the inside out. And so there's various ways of seeing the world, right? And the more you can uh, purify your character, the more you can employ your intellect and study and understand history and do all you can as an individual to better yourself and work toward the betterment of the world around you, you're going to begin to shift and see the world in a much radically different way. And then And then you're going to have compassion for those who aren't doing those things. And let
Mm-hmm.
me give you an example of what I mean by that. I do a lot of work around the issue of racism. And so everybody's on the same page when we talk about racism. What we're talking about is uh, prejudice plus power, like the two together, is what makes something which makes a system a racist system. And so what I wanted to share about that is um, people come into the conversation, I've experienced it. I've been doing it for a few years now. They come into the conversation at different levels of awareness when it comes to issues of race. Some people are fully dialed in to an understanding, and are fully conscious and aware of what it is. They understand, for example, that we had 246 years of slavery in this country, which was violent, and the brutal chattel slavery was something that was very horrible, very violent, very brutal, that still has its legacy, still exists today. They're also aware that we, following slavery, 246 years, but we had 12 years of having black codes, which was this idea of criminalizing every aspect of black freedom. They're also aware that we had, after that, we had what was close to 100 years of Jim Crow laws, right? Segregation of races, our own form of apartheid in this country. And that was then followed by, mass incarceration of people from our inner cities, right? And so there's people who are aware of those things. There are also people who are aware of, they're connected from a heart level where they can see someone else's pain and suffering, right? So they're not disconnected. So that's one type of individual, that they understand history, they understand how racism and prejudice has not gone away. The anti-blackness and anti-anything other than white is still prevalent in our society. They're not confused by that. But also, there's people that who kind of in the middle. They, as you talk to them, you think they mean they're kind of confused. They think they know, but they don't really know. As you kind of unpack what they're saying, he's like, I'm not sure. You've done your homework on this one, and they're a little confused, that's just how it is. Then there's people that the issue is completely invisible to them. They can't
Mm-hmm.
actually see the issue. And then when you get these three groups together of folks, it creates a lot. There's layers of complexity there. But those who have that understanding are also approaching those who don't have it with a sense of compassion, because in order to have that level of understanding and awareness, you have to come at it from the heart. So it's not about being angry at folks. Like, if someone has a certain frame of reference, are you going to be angry and frustrated that they have their frame of reference? If you have yours, and they should be allowed to have theirs, right? So it's understanding that that's what it is. It's about someone's frame of reference. And I think one thing that's really important, though, is to be able to have a society where we can have tough conversations, where we're okay with and developing the capacity to, um, as I mentioned, have these difficult conversations around things like race, and be able to hear different perspectives on things you may not want to hear, but we have to have the conversation. I think there's so much animus and disunity in the world today that we want to pit this one against this one, and there's so much infighting around various topics, race being one of those. Um, and as I talk to people who don't like what I'm saying, and don't like the idea of races coming together in unity, that's their choice. And so I never respond with anger. I'm sure you're familiar with the writings of Dwayne Dyer. Right?
Mm-hmm.
He wrote a book called The Power of Intention. I love what he was saying when we talked about um, what comes out of you are things that are already within you. And he gave an example of that. If you take an orange and you squeeze an orange, only that comes out of the orange is orange juice. So that's what's in there. When we're squeezed by life and pressured by life, what comes out of us are things that are already there.
Mm-hmm.
So it's the idea that, I wake up each day, and this may sound a little bit strange, but I don't mind being challenged by life. It gives me an idea of where I am spiritually, right? So if I'm in a traffic jam and I'm getting frustrated and angry, that's feedback for me that maybe I'm not as patient as I thought I was. You just kick back and say a little prayer and like sing kumbaya. I'm just being silly, but put on some nice music or something to calm down. And so these things in life that will give you feedback are very important. But the whole idea, because I wake up with this framework of I need to build my character, I need to improve myself. So I want the feedback. If you don't get feedback, how are you going to improve? So That's just some of the things I wanted to share.
That's awesome. I love how you're coming back to character development and how important it is to develop character and to continue to evolve and develop our capacity to understand the world. Now we're not our framework, our narrative is not just given; we're also creating it. So it's all these things all happening at the same time. I'm creating my narrative, even if I'm aware of it or not, by the exposure that I have, the experiences I have, the conversations that I have. But I'm also interpreting that reality. I'm also acting on it based on how I'm seeing things. All these things can happen simultaneously, and I think that what you're saying is reflecting that. And I like also how you're again how complexity is important, how development is important, educating ourselves, understanding how one may frame reality. You've mentioned several different situations here. You've mentioned
Mhm.
religion, how different religions frame reality differently, how uh, we've framed the conversation around male bodies and female bodies differently over history, how we've framed the concept of race differently, and how important it is to have a conversation across these different
Yeah.
frames, these different perspectives, and having compassion for those who may have a different perspective than you do. Doesn't mean that you agree, of course, folks. Some people, I don't think that all perspectives are equal.
Right.
I
That's so
think they
true.
can be equally
Yeah.
explored. Sure, equally explore perspectives. I think that there are some perspectives that are a little bit more comprehensive, a little bit more inclusive, and so that perspective can take into consideration multiple different angles and twists, while some perspective only can have one narrow particular view of the world. Like, for instance, the one around race. Like, well, you have this perspective that there's harmony between the so-called races. Somebody else may say that, no, I think my race is better than yours. Um, and they might think that reason because, no, you've been brutal to me, and therefore I think I'm better than you now because based on 300 years or 400 years of brutality, I think I'm better than
Hmm.
you. Like, no, 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 I'm better than you because I, my quote unquote race has subjected you to 400 years of brutality. So therefore, I think I'm better than you. And when you sit back and look at it, you're like, this is just insane. And I think that if we're willing to have that historical understanding and have a broad perspective on how we see things, and that requires, like you're mentioning, a consistently educating ourselves historically, uh, but not just historically, but trying to put ourselves in the shoes of someone else, at least having that cognitive empathy. How do you see the world? And the only way I'm going to do that is I have to have a conversation with someone. Maybe I have to read some literature by someone that I may not necessarily agree with. But at least I get the opportunity to see where they are coming from. And based on that, I can possibly have some compassion. I might not agree, but I can have some compassion. And with that compassion, it allows an opportunity, it opens up the opportunity for connection, and that's ultimately what we're looking for. At least I agree with you on that. Love is
Yeah.
that connection, and that connection is not going to happen if I don't allow myself to be open and receptive to you, even if I disagree with you. And we can then have those challenging conversations. And as a black person, for instance, I don't want to have to adapt a view that I'm better than you uh, because of the horrible history that your ancestors have imposed on my ancestors. I'm not gonna. I've had that viewpoint, particularly when I started reading history and trying to understand. I was angry.
Yeah.
I was just like, how? No wonder so much craziness is going on in my community because the legacy of that past is in our culture. It's in how
Yeah.
we behave and how we interact. And so I was angry for a while until I came to a point where I kept understanding. Hold on. Let me keep trying to understand. Let me keep expanding myself. Let me keep continue to develop my character. but to expand my worldview, my capacity to see things, has allowed me to be compassionate, to have a better sense of understanding, and allow me to be much more open and willing to connect with others through love. But that require what you're speaking about: character development, education, uh, trying to understand the world through different lenses, and compassion. You have to have compassion, because if there's no compassion there's no way you're going to open up to another person. It's just not going to
Yeah.
happen. You're not going to listen to it. You can say it, hey, I'm listening to you, I hear you, but no, you're not. You're like, I hear
No,
you at a
no.
distance. I'm not willing to.
Right.
You're just evil. You're just a bad person, and I can't tolerate you. I mean, there are bad people out there, quote unquote, bad people out there. Absolutely.
Hmm.
But I think opening ourselves up and giving ourselves the opportunity to listen and to see the world through another person's lens, it creates the possibility for connection, a profound, deep connection. I think it's just love itself.
Yeah. One of the things that also informs kind of how I see things is, especially dealing with a career I had where I was dealing with a lot of people who were making bad choices. I've never lost sight of the fact, and this is a Baha'i perspective on us as human beings, is that we're all born noble. God didn't
Mm-hmm.
create someone that's not noble, but the choices we make in our environment, in various conditions, cause people to have make poor choices. Develop a bad character. Um, and then there's so many factors that go into it. We need to be careful about blaming people without understanding that they're walking to be a tough path. Like, for
Mm-hmm.
example, if you arrest someone for stealing a jacket, but you don't help them when they get out of jail, they're still going to be cold.
Mm-hmm.
This idea that we need to address it, we need to help each other and not just shift blame. Well, you stole something, you need to go to jail. Like, well, he may have to go to jail, but we also have to address some of these factors that are causing crime and problems in the first place. And so I want to just add a little bit more about this idea of a new narrative around the word justice, because it can be very confusing for a lot of people. A lot of people, when they think in terms of justice, they think simply in terms of reward and punishment. But the
Mm-hmm.
problem with this simple concept of reward and punishment is, if those who are in power, have a power-based mindset, they're going to be the ones creating who gets the rewards and who gets punished. So
Mm-hmm.
and we know that there's never been a fair system. So this a new concept of justice, which would be, is when everyone has the right and opportunity to thrive in all those four areas I talked about: physically, emotionally, intellectually, and spiritually. That would be, and all people would have the right to thrive. And when those opportunities are not there, that's an injustice.
Mm-hmm.
So when you get an education only based on your zip code, that's an injustice. I mean, that has to be corrected, right? I think when we think in terms of, and I think I mentioned this in a prior discussion we had about how we are all like, and we're analogous to a single body, and then the body is composed of various cells having various functions within our body, with various organs doing certain things, but a very diverse system, our body. And when we think about like how each cell in our body has a role to play, and each cell, a healthy cell, both contributes and serves the body, right? And any cell that's outside of that and it's not doing those things, we give it a name like cancer, we call it something else, because it's not serving the body, it's harming the body. So if we look at ourselves as individual cells in the body, we look at our organs as our institutions, and they all need to work in harmony one with the other. So that's the ultimate goal that we're trying to attain: this idea of harmony and balance, and realizing we are all interconnected. If I harm you, I essentially am harming myself.
Mm-hmm.
We are not, and a lot of philosophers, a lot of and pretty much all of the the manifestations or messengers of God have said similar things around our relationship with each other. We are all interconnected. Like, when you look at a forest, you see externally, you see the trees, but underneath, you don't realize all those roots are interconnected. At a deepest level, we are all interconnected. It's only the surface that we differ, right? Our phenotype, how we look. But think about this. This is crazy, right? When we see cows on a hill and maybe it's a black cow, a white cow, a brown cow, they're not bickering, arguing over I'm the better cow because I'm this color. But then you look at the human realm, and we're like, oh, you're black, I'm white, I'm yellow, and I'm red, and we're I'm better. No, you're better. It's like, wait a minute, animals don't even do this. Why are we doing this as human beings? So in one sense, it's humorous, but also tragic at the same
Mm-hmm.
time. Yeah.
Yeah. Good stuff. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, brother. I can listen to you all day talk about these things. I think that I'm glad you brought up the this concept of justice. And I think the way that you're looking at justice is quite beautiful. And I think that I've been lately, the last few years, a couple of years, I've been really delving into Greek philosophy, particularly like the Plato, Aristotle, and the Stoics, etc. And it's these concepts and this conversation that Socrates is having with everyone. What is justice? What is it? And I think just having that conversation, exploring the ideas about what justice is so important and so crucial. And how you're looking at justice is not just punishment and reward, but how do we understand, again, from the very beginning, how one is seeing the world, and how do we provide favorable conditions through education to help them develop in those four ways that you mentioned. I think that's a big problem here.
Mhm.
Yes, we have these historical legacies. Of course, I guess we're both African American. We can talk about this. We have some issues, and it
Big
just
time.
we were not born this way. There are historical legacies that have led us
Yes.
to have cultural issues. I have no shame in saying that we have cultural issues. It's not just the man. We have issues, and those issues didn't pop out of nowhere. They are a result of a legacy of trauma. Nonetheless, how do we create favorable conditions to
Yeah.
help mitigate the problems of that legacy? Not just for African Americans, for everybody. How do we create an educational system which I think is creating favorable conditions and challenging people under those favorable conditions to overcome those challenges? Be it reading a piece of literature, be it taking care of your physical health better, be it some kind of spiritual development, some kind of capacity to cultivate emotional intelligence. And again, we're missing the cognitive part, helping people learn how to think more clearly, to use reason. I can include all the things that you mentioned, history, all of these things. If they're properly given to an individual, we can increase the likelihood of people understanding this harmony, um, or at least being open to the harmony that is the true nature of things. But
Yeah.
that won't happen unless those conditions are offered. And you've been a police officer. You've probably seen things that I don't even can't imagine, don't even want to even think about. And it's amazing that you who's seen that didn't get callous. You're still, based on your worldview, was able to, and I guess continue to look at that through a lens of compassion. Like, okay, then this behavior is not appropriate, really bad decision, but there's still hope. What if we create these favorable conditions to help, which is justice? The justice is, okay, then, how do we create favorable conditions to
Yes.
help these individuals transform and see the world differently and increase the probability of them recognizing that interconnectedness that you're speaking of? But you know what that's going to require, Bob? That's going to require an evolution of our culture as a society, because our educational system is not designed in that fashion. It's not designed
That's right.
it makes sense to me, based on what you're saying and many conversations I've had with others, that it makes sense that our educational system would be designed to develop human beings, to develop the character that you were speaking of, by taking into consideration those four parameters that you mentioned: the body, emotions, the intellect, as well as spiritual. But we're not doing that, and I think that that's a big challenge. But I think people like yourself sharing that news and sharing that perspectives and sharing how important that is it's an important part of the equation, I salute you for sharing what you've been sharing with us today, because it is such an important piece of the equation, that I feel like needs to be spoken of more, needs to be disseminated more out in our world.
Absolutely. But also, I don't know how much time we have left, but I want to get in this one piece of information that's sort of like very important. Um, is that regards to our current institutions, and I feel like all of these institutions that we are referring to and have spoken about, whether it's education or criminal justice system, were created and developed at a more immature stage in our collective evolution.
Yeah.
So now that we hopefully are thinking of terms of a more mature way of looking at this with a different understanding of justice and all these kinds of things, the oneness of humanity. Now we need to think about in terms of our institutions as I would say it is be the natural evolution. And here's what I mean by that. There's this concept called supplanting something versus reforming something. And I
Mm-hmm.
want to kind of distinguish the difference. I can take an old jalopy and I can paint it over, but it's still an old jalopy. And so when speaking of a vehicle, we didn't enter out of the horse and buggy age in which we were using that as a primary means of travel. We didn't reform the horse and buggy system. We merely replaced it with a more efficient ways of travel. So
Mm-hmm.
now we have cars, rocket ships to the moon. We have jets and steamliners and all kinds of stuff. But my point I'm making is we need to apply like the application of science and how we evolve things. We need to think in terms of our institutions in this. We need to have like a scientific approach to how we evolve our institutions, right?
Yes.
They weren't meant to be static; they were meant to
Mm-hmm.
evolve. And so, but evolving in a way that's consistent with our own thinking, right? And so, how we can then take this more mature way of thinking and say, what do we need to develop? Like, for example, I'll give you a small example of this. I asked the question. I've been in law enforcement, did it for several decades, but I'm trying to put myself. If I was working, I'd be putting myself out of business because I'm thinking, how do we act? What actually prevents crime from happening in the first place? It's not building more prisons. It's not creating more penal laws and all these things. It's done through education, right?
Yep.
Moral and creating these, removing these pre-existing social conditions that create disparities. Let's get rid of those, and let's realize that a good character and having people having be morally developed and educated will actually prevent crime from happening. Now, when I worked in as a school resource officer for a couple of years, working with kids, and I would be able to talk to kids, and I would sometimes ask the question: if your teacher left the office, left the room rather, and left money in the desk, or left her purse open with lots of money, what prevents you from actually stealing the money? And it's shocking. Some of the kids are like, "Wow, there could be a camera in here." It was all external, like extrinsic. I can get caught. It's like at some point, some wise kid, no, because it's wrong. Yeah, the answer is because it's wrong. you know,
Exactly.
yeah. So the idea of what prevents, my point is, what prevents crime is actually having a good moral foundation and character, which is in your moral compass to guide you away from those things and into the right path of action. And
Absolutely.
so I'm aware of these things, and so we need to think. Okay, even when we think about our criminal justice system, we need to stop arresting people and and give them opportunities to thrive, right? And educate them morally. So one of the things that the Baha'i Faith is doing worldwide is helping young people, children, and junior youth develop their a stronger moral framework in which they can then contribute to the betterment of not only themselves but to the world around them. And I think those are the actions Baha'is are taking worldwide to try to improve the conditions of the world. Because, as I mentioned earlier, we are scientific giants and moral midgets. We are not in balance, and we need to get
Mm-hmm.
ourselves in balance.
Oh, just beautiful. Yes. Yes, yes, yes. I think yeah, we've designed institutions at a particular phase or stage in human development. It's a particular structure, a way of
Yeah,
looking at the world, and a way of that the society, the social lens that we see the world. Individual has a lens, but the society, or the organ and institution has a lens. And those various institutions were created based on a particular social lens. But we've oftentimes failed to transcend those particular institutions, to create newer institutions that are much more evolved than the current institutions. And I think that, yes, brother, that's beautiful. Keep saying it, because I think that's
Yeah.
an important message. It is not to say, I think I a lot of times I hesitate to talk about development and evolution, and there are different stages of development, at least based on just looking at models. There are different models of
Hmm.
seeing how culture has evolved, society has evolved, individuals evolve. It's important to look at that because it's like the structure of the mind, the structure of the story of each one of those are different. When I say something has evolved, it's expanded as it has a larger view. I like to give the analogy of a high rise, and you're on the fifth floor versus someone on the third floor. It's not that the person on the fifth floor is a better person necessarily than the person on the third floor. It's just that the person on the fifth floor has a bigger view, has a much more expansive view than a person on the third floor. So if you have a criminal justice system, if you have an educational system that was designed by someone on the first floor, really, where we are,
Yeah.
and then you have somebody on the fifth floor saying, hey, there's much more complexity here. There's much more that we could
Right.
take into consideration here. How about we reinvent how we are seeing things? That first floor level doesn't work because it doesn't take into consideration all of these different things that you can see, the perspective that you can take from higher levels. And I think that that's a message that has to be articulated. Because, and again, people have this idea that if you talk about fifth floor person versus first floor person, that you're trying to say that the fifth floor person is better than the first floor person. Not necessarily. No, that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is there's a bigger view.
Yeah.
And from that bigger view, the person on the fifth floor actually have a greater responsibility for their moral and ethical development because they can see things more. And if they can, you can be on the fifth floor and have a first floor moral development.
Hmm.
And that's horrible. And as we can see that
Yeah.
in the world today. And I think that it's important to think about that, to think about our current criminal justice system, for instance, and our educational system as well. It is not designed based on looking at the world from this expansive view that you've articulated from the very beginning. I, for one, don't understand why we don't have the physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual pillars of our educational system. We do not. We're actually getting rid of PE, taking out the physical part. It's strange.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so I just
Childhood obesity is on the rise, and all kinds
exactly
of
childhood obesity, and then the spiritual part. You might hang that
yeah.
up.
Yeah.
And
Gun
so
violence.
yeah, and so I just think that a lot of what you're saying and what you said is just awesome, appropriate, important, and I hope the audience is gathered so much. I mean, you say so much. I think that there's so much to reflect on. I hope to folks go back and listen to this conversation again because there was a lot here, a lot
Yeah.
that Bob
But
has
I have to add one
laid.
last thing though about
Yeah,
because
yeah,
it's something that wasn't fully complete. So when I mentioned we evolved from the horse and buggy system into a more advanced means of travel today. Okay, so but when you think about the horse and buggy system, the goal of that was to travel much faster than on foot, right? So the goal was so telling people, oh, we now have a car that can go a lot faster. It was easy transition for people. Now I'm only saying that for this reason when you think about our current institutions, they have different goals, right?
yep,
So the goal of our criminal justice system is to keep people in prison. So if that's the goal, then nothing will change, right?
mm-mm.
But so we have to change the goal. The goal should be to have everyone thrive. All the things we've talked about. Everyone, develop, thrive, have opportunities, and develop themselves, their character, all these things. So we even our you mentioned you thought earlier like the zero sum game of how our economic system, but it, the goals have to like if things were created with a competitive mindset, the mindset has to change, because in order to change our external circumstances, we must first change our inner circumstances. And so there's this powerful quotation from Baha'u'llah. Actually, it's from our main administrative body called the Universal House of Justice, who said that world order can be founded only on an unshakable consciousness of the oneness of humankind. I'll say that again. World order can be founded only on an unshakable consciousness of the oneness of mankind. So our consciousness has to change first. And if that changes, like, think about how I operate in the world versus someone that has a competitive mindset. I was working alongside officers that had a competitive mindset, and how they treated the citizens. I won't tell you what I've seen, what I had to witness, and what I had to intervene and try to address in dealing with my coworkers who were operating with that mindset. Then I had people like me who had a different mindset, had a guardian mindset, where they're just there to try to partner with the community, trying to, um, you know, um, uh, protect and serve, but not as a cliche, but as an actual way of interacting with the community, realizing that I can't do my job unless you trust me. So what can I do as an individual officer to build trust with you as a community? So that was my mindset. But everything starts with the mindset. And so if we can shift our mindset, and I love the words, and I share this is one of my favorite quotes from Martin Luther King. He says, "Time itself is neutral. It can either be used destructively or constructively." He says, "More and more I feel that people of ill will will have used time more effectively than people of goodwill." So what we need is a tipping point with people that have embraced a larger vision of humanity. And once you get more people thinking the way you and I think, and others who are listening to this podcast are thinking, then we can begin to shift that over to a more, it's about there's a tipping point. There's a book. I think there's a book called The Tipping Point. I
Yeah.
haven't read it, but this is what we need to do. We need to have that enough of a mass of people tipping that scale.
Absolutely. Man, this has been great. I've
It
enjoyed
has.
your intelligence, brother. I think it's important that you're out there with your voice, your intelligence, the way that you're seeing the world. You're
Thank
a
you.
very, very important voice in the world. And I'm grateful to have had this conversation with you. I hope the audience has gotten as much out of it as I have. I mean, we're pretty much coming to a close here. Yeah, just very eloquent and very
Thank you.
well articulated. And yeah, I just so many questions. I can just talk to you all day. I'm serious. Literally can just talk to you so all day. I hope to have you come back. We can have
I'd
a
love to.
conversation again and dig into something more specific. And I think that that's what I want to take this to eventually, is to have more specific conversations around a particular subject matter that's related to the ultimate goal of living a good life. But before we leave, I would like to. Do you have any final words that you would like to share with the audience before we jump off here?
Sure. I just wanted to share that this is coming. I'm trying to come from the heart in this one, not the head. Um, what the world needs today is what I was saying earlier. We need a world that is coming from the heart. Um, legislation can only take us so far. You can't legislate morality, for example. I
Mm-mm.
can't legislate you treating me better if you're opposed to how I look. But one thing that I know is the solution, which is, if I can strip away all the artificial barriers that separate you from me, and if I can get to the point where I can see you and you can see me, what you'll see is that we're the same. And when you see that we're the same, then you wouldn't harm yourself, because harming me means harming yourself. Um, and so I just hope in my world utopia is that we evolve to the point where we can see each other. I love the line in uh, what's the movie Avatar, where they use this term "I see you." Right? I don't know if
Mm-hmm.
you've seen the movie Avatar,
Yeah, yeah,
but they
yeah.
use this concept of "I see you," and we need to see each other. I see you as a brother, right? You're not, and so I'll end with this. One of the concepts in the Baha'i Faith is that um, we shouldn't see. I'm sort of paraphrasing this concept, but that we shouldn't see strangers. everyone is family. Everyone is a friend. And when we get to that point where we can see each other in that capacity, in that light, then we'll have real change in the world today.
Beautiful, my brother. Thank you so much for blessing us with your presence and your thoughts, your ideas, your intelligence. Yeah, thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Thank you so much for tuning into the show. I hope this conversation has inspired you to reflect on your own views of the good life. If you enjoyed the show and want to hear more inspiring and thought-provoking conversations, please follow, write a review, and rate us on your favorite podcast app. If you are tuning in on YouTube, please hit that like button and subscribe. Your support is very much appreciated.